Um, once again, welcome everybody, January 8th, 2026. We have a set of technical issues that Matt has either been working on or has not yet had a chance to work on, a couple of which we might defer until Skylar and Kate are with us. Those technical issues include normalized email objects and contact methods, serialization, and ranking. Those are the two proposals that I think you've been working on with Skylar, so we might table those. There's also other issues of schema level IDs and the discrepancy in the schema documentation between, with regards to the relationship between organizations and services, the discrepancy between maybe the ERD and the JSON sample or something. I don't know. You can clarify for me, Matt. And then we started a conversation last time about documentation and our priorities for additional documentation, and that may be where we spend much of our time right now. I'd also open the floor for just like questions and suggestions from the committee, just, at the start of this year, reflect, maybe we can take a moment to reflect on what we did last year and think about what ought to be on our agenda for this year. And your questions or suggestions would be welcome. So, because I don't see Jeff on the call with regards to the validator, we might not have much to discuss. In regards to the transformer, we also might not have much to discuss. So this could be a light day. It might not go a full hour. Matt, while I've walked through this, anything else that you want to suggest for the agenda, or anybody else? We'll go ahead, Matt, first, and then we'll see if anybody else wants to put something on here.
Yeah, so no additional suggestions for the agenda. I think the ordering should be the normalized email objects and contact methods should go towards the bottom of the agenda. I can give some updates on the other two technical issues that we've kind of hyperlinked to. In fact, I've already got my notes in the doc, so I can just walk you through that. And then any discussion that we want around additional documentation based on things that people have been chatting about in the forums and on various calls and stuff, be great. On the validator check-in, Jeff, I was on a call with Jeff just recently. He's recovering from bronchitis, so I think he's probably just giving his voice a rest this hour in particular.
All right. Anybody else want to ask any questions or make any other suggestions for the agenda? Okay, Matt, how about you go ahead and give us the updates that you have on the technical issues that don't involve Skylar and Kate, and then we can take some time to debrief from last year and reflect on the next year, and then maybe we can talk through documentation. We'll see if Skylar and Kate join us.
Great, yes. So the two issues which I've been kind of grappling with over the last few days and a little bit in December when they kind of became apparent, I'll start with the schema level ID properties. So the standard is defined in JSON schema. It is considered good practice to give the schemas themselves an ID, which is denoted by this kind of $ ID property. And they should be URLs which then resolve to the schema. And the reason that it is good practice, without getting into the proper technical nitty-gritty, you can uniquely identify the schema itself, so people can declare I am using the open referral schema. And because we use the versioning system on and use GitHub branches for that, it means that we can actually create IDs for specific versions of the schemas, which is good. And also, if people are writing validators with GitHub's kind of HTTP rate limiting at the minute, it means that they can grab a schema, cache it, and be guaranteed that it is the same schema. If they can update it periodically without kind of getting kind of rate limited there. So it's considered good practice, but I suspected that some of the design of how we've implemented a HSDS in the past would kind of snag us there. So I've went away and kind of done a bit of research and a bit of experimentation. And the short answer is it's very straightforward to add the ID properties. I have done so in a kind of experimental branch. It was a job of about 5 minutes. The trade-off at the minute is with the way that the tooling is set up, is that when we compile the schemas to then kind of use, and the open API, so the API specification, that is kind of linked to the compiled schemas. That's what it's telling people that they're going to be receiving. So in some cases, the compiled schemas will inherit the ID, which sounds like a good thing on the surface, but it actually means that if we were to use that ID, we would get to the uncompiled schema, which is kind of not the way that this thing is designed to work. So there would be a little bit of a workaround there, stuff that we could do technically, stuff that we could do manually, etc. As part of this experimentation, I discovered a bug in the openapi.json file. I've raised a patch, I've raised a pull request, which I'll be putting into a patch process following this. That's more of an FYI. And what we were also concerned about is profiles, because profiles are different schemas at a kind of physical level, so they shouldn't have the same ID. And I also uncovered a bug in the schema tool, which I have fixed. The schema tools, which I've fixed, and I've raised the PR for that. I was right in my suspicions in that, for example, if you would have to manually override the ID in order to get your kind of custom profile schema identifier, because it would be misidentifying itself as, for example, the HSDS service schema, when in fact it's the ORUK service schema. So there are different ways in order to kind of work around those things. So the immediate next step for us is, there's a hand up, Mike.
Mike, go ahead. You're on mute.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow, Matt. If you want to finish your para and then.
Yeah, sure. So the immediate next steps are there's a quick patch process to go through. That should involve quite lightweight involvement from the committee. It's just any like quick. I'll put a forum post up. Have a quick look. If you have an issue with something that I've been implementing, then say nay. Otherwise, it goes through to the kind of 3.2.1 version. I need to merge my fix into the HSDS schema tools. That's not kind of governed in the same way, or at least we haven't said it is. So there's a little bit more flexibility there. So I'm going to do a little bit of due diligence and testing. If anyone wants to be involved in that, that would be great. But otherwise, I'm pretty confident that I can just merge that in safely and kind of fix the bug in the profile generation. That was specifically around you can generate a profile based off a specific branch of HSDS. So, for example, you might have a profile that's based off an older branch and you want to rebase it to get access to some new features. And that's kind of how the tool said that it was set up. But there was a bug just with a few characters on the end of a URL, which accidentally only ever pulled through the 3.0 branch. So you would only ever be able to base a profile off 3.0. That is now no longer the case. Once that's merged in, you can do it as you intended. So yeah, and then the step for the committee really is to decide on how important it is to us that we have these ID fields in the short term. I think long term, good, it's the direction to move in. In terms of the short term, I think that's up to us. Like, what problems are we trying to solve? Who's encountering problems related to the lack of ID? We kind of have de facto IDs. We just haven't like kind of declared them properly because our schemas are available at URLs. And if we decide that it is important to us, we should decide on what route we want to go to address the kind of issues that I've just highlighted there. I have some initial thoughts on resolving the issues, but before I discuss those and kind of pollute the waters a little bit, I'll kind of defer back to Mike and any other questions, comments, and manifestos that anyone may have.
Thanks, Matt. I mean, my answer to your last question is important but not urgent, time-wise. I'm conscious that the current root API call should make reference, I think, both to the profile version and to the HSDS of which it is based, and I just wanted to check that we intended to continue to do that rather than have to look up the profile and from the profile look up what it came from, i.e. so we've got both a version number and a profile version in the root API call. Then the other question was just about versioning. You said it's a patch. I mean, is it just a patch, or is it a breaking change or whatever? And at present, with our profile, we've got the rather unsatisfactory solution whereby if there is no version, if there is no root call, we assume it's our version 1. Otherwise, we assume it's version 3. Now, obviously, we still, if the ID is not in our version 3.0, we're still going to have to make an assumption that, you know, there's a root call. It's not got an ID, so it's version 3.0. It has got an ID. It's version 3.1.2 or beyond. Yeah.
Great. Are there any other hands up before I kind of jump in to respond? Can't see. Got any hands up?
No, go for it.
Great. Yeah, so the patch process, sorry, I think I might have accidentally conflated the patch with the addition of the IDs just in my kind of monologue there. The patch is for a bug that I spotted as a result of doing this investigation. So the bug is that in the OpenAPI file, the URL which says get me this service at location object by its ID, it was wired up to the service schema rather than the service at location schema. So this patch fixes that. That's a kind of separate issue. I was just doing an investigation into which compiled schemas were being used, and I kind of spotted that. So sorry everyone for conflating that. And the other thing that you mentioned, Mike, was the kind of the root API object. At the moment, that doesn't actually use any of the ID, like the kind of URL ID type stuff that we're talking about here. It possibly should in the future. At the moment, the root object, if I remember correctly, it can declare its version number as a string. I'm not sure whether there's any restrictions on the format of that string. I think there isn't. And also it declares a URL to a openapi.json file, which is assumed to belong to the profile that this is of. And that's kind of not enforced, but it's kind of, it would be very strange behavior to link to a different profile, because that's kind of what's going to be used for validation.
We should swap both of those to using the ID in a future version.
I think it's reasonable to swap those to using an ID in the future, and I think it's also reasonable to come up with a very lightweight data model representing a profile in JSON. So you could come up with so a profile would have at a URL somewhere a definition profile.json, and it would link to its documentation, its OpenAPI file, its set of schemas, etc., etc. So it can all be resolved kind of that way. It's just not kind of how it's set up at the minute. Nicholas.
Nick, you're still on mute.
Yeah, I was thinking as well, which was part of the problem. So the brain cells weren't going quick enough. IDs in the schema, it's a UUID, isn't it? But we're talking about hopefully a persistent resolvable URL as the eventual one, particularly for Open Referral UK, which needs to fit in with UK government policy of using persistent resolvable URLs as the ID. And I've just put a comment in the chat, and I'm actually a good fan of having content negotiation for determining what comes back as well. So it can be, if you ask for HTML, then you get back informative information about it, whereas if you ask for JSON, you get back the spec.
Yeah, and so I think what we might be conflating here is the UUID of specific objects versus the identifier for the schema itself. So we're talking here about the schema identifier. So I am this schema identified at this URL. I agree with you in that I do think I would like a future where a good service identifier is a resolvable URI, which can then be done with content negotiation, because I mean that's just beautiful and a pure world that we would live in then. But what we're talking about here is fitting with good practice with JSON schemas and having an identifier for the schema file.
So that's in the schema. It's still in the JSON schema file, though, at the individual schema level and at the combined schema level, yeah?
So what we're talking, yeah, so what, for example, the service.json schema would have a URL ending in service.json, and that URL would be resolvable to that schema. And then what I'm saying is one of the fallouts of kind of having that is that the compiled schemas, which are treated as the canonical ones, inherit those, and we would need to do a little bit of adjustment to our processes for managing those schemas in order to kind of ensure that that URL was resolving to the correct schema.
And then a Swagger representation would then have a different ID, which would return the Swagger representation of it as well.
So I don't. So I'm not talking about the Open API definition. I'm talking about the schema definitions for the models. So each of these would be defined by a URL, and then that URL would be resolvable to that model. So the Swagger definition, that's Open API. Presumably that should have a URI for its identifier as well.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's the same principle, just applied to JSON schema.
I just want to do a check. I want to do a check here because I don't. It may be important for us to figure this out sooner than later, but this is really like, I think it's only Mike that really needs to sort this out. I don't know if anybody else here really is thinking through the implications, maybe just because, you know, nobody else is really working actively with the profile. But it seems like we've reached a satisfactory resolution, and there might still be, questions about implementation details, and maybe Mike and Nicholas and Matt can discuss the implementation details offline.
I think we have. It's not urgent, but I think it is relevant to the validator when that's more widely used.
Okay. But Mike, Nick, do you agree that we've sort of sorted this out for now, and we can continue discussing implementation details, offline? Okay. Great.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you all. Matt, is the schema discrepancy issue pretty straightforward? It seems like you summed it up at length in the notes here.
Yeah, sorry, that kind of sum up got away from me a little bit. So changing tack, we're still talking about schemas, and the core issue here is, again, how those schemas are then compiled. So for everyone who has had a nice relaxing break, the schemas that you see in the schema folder in the repository are kind of the definitions of the objects that we have, and they all have the relationships between them. And then we run a compilation step, which results in the schemas that you see in the compiled folder within that schema folder. And those schemas are the ones that are considered canonical as far as the API specification is concerned, because it kind of collapses all those different models into a few ones that are considered like the kind of the views on HSDS. So this issue emerged when the Stevens University students were doing some work with Open Referral, and they spotted that there is a discrepancy between the organization schema, the uncompiled version, and the compiled version, where the compiled version has an array of services attached to it, and the uncompiled version didn't, and it wasn't clear how this kind of got there, but it got there consistently when you compiled the thing, and it provided a kind of an existential question for us, because we treat these schemas as relatively declarative and deterministic. You have this kind of very well understood compilation process where you dereference things and put them in these views. And then this field was appearing seemingly out of nowhere. So we did a bit of investigation before the winter break and determined that the HSDS schema tool script, which is run as part of our kind of docs management, and it's run as part of the profiles, etc., has a manual step where after it compiles the organization schema, which doesn't declare an array of services, it will then manually add that in programmatically. So there was and that's not documented anywhere. So that was the issue, was that we had this behavior. It wasn't documented. It was unclear whether it was a bug, whether it was intended behavior, and what that behavior was designed for. I had some theories, but then Greg managed to use his social capital to pull David Braz back into the conversation, who was the original implementer of the schema tools. And he has responded in that GitHub thread, which I've linked to there. The summary of his response is that the compiled schemas are the spec. That's what we consider to be HSDS. The uncompiled schemas show a vision of the spec if one assumes is service-oriented view, and therefore that view shouldn't include organization.services because it adds that recursive relationship. And the entire purpose of the compiled schemas is to provide a view where you can access services via the organization object, which was stated as a use case for people. So rather than going through entire list of services and checking for updates one by one, you could focus on an organization by polling the organization, getting the list of services that it's attached to, checking for the changes there. And he stated that it was only really relevant to the larger publishers or exchanges, and that really service is kind of considered a soft kind of top level object in HSDS. So that's kind of where we are. And my questions, I think, to this committee are, does that still hold true? Is that what we still believe the model of HSDS is? And are there better ways to kind of achieve that? Because we can accept that as a decision that has been made as part of the design, and I think we should just document it properly. Or we could pay off the technical debt by reworking that compilation step, or we could adjust how we process and kind of compile these schemas in order to meet what we believe our needs actually are right now, if we don't think that those needs hold true any longer. So that's kind of the discussion to be had, I think. So, do nothing but write down what we've done, rework some technical gubbins to keep what we've done, but kind of do it a bit better, or adjust our kind of vision of HSDS and ensure that the tooling then meets that.
And I think though it was confusing for the transformer folks, I think we did have a question last time, maybe from Kate, about like, is this causing anybody pain? And it's not clear that it is.
Well, there is a little bit of pain being caused. I don't think it's causing people pain who are just exchanging information about the about services and organizations. But there's a line here that I've added around some additional context. So there's two links there going to issues raised on the HSDS schema tools GitHub, where people are saying, I'm trying to make a profile, I'm trying to get rid of these schemas or these relationships, but I can't because this program adds them in manually. So it's causing these people issues. I don't know whether they're kind of prominent members of the community, whether they were just doing this out of kind of academic curiosity at one point. But I think that's kind of emblematic of this is the trade-off between kind of not. We could just document it and say, okay, here's the additional steps that you need to take to remove these relationships in your profile. I think that's maybe not collaborative, but it's okay to do if we are hamstrung with our kind of resources and this is too complex to crack open right now.
Okay. Let's just take a round of clarifying questions first. Did anybody follow that? Do you have a sense of the situation?
I'm now kicking myself for coming in late because I feel like context here, but
Kate, welcome. I'm going to share. This is the issue that we're talking about, and the summary of what Matt just walked through is on this page. It's basically it's the schema discrepancy section on page 3. And Matt has offered a summary of the issue, some questions, and a set of possible ways forward. So, Kate, while you take a quick look through that, anybody else have any clarifying questions or topics that you want to add under this agenda item?
So let me make sure my head is wrapped around this correctly. So this is resulting in some implementer having a cyclical relationship that is disallowing removal of objects. Is that what I heard you saying earlier? Like, what is the end result that's being complained about, so I can understand, what's making this occur?
Okay, so the cyclical relationship is between organization and service, where a service is provided by an organization. There's a reference to the organization, and then the canonical compiled schemas have an array of services. So that kind of ends. You could end up with a relationship there.
I mean, that is bad.
Well, so I agree with that. So the original implementer, David Raz, stated basically that relationship was added as by request when we were implementing HSTS 3.0, because there was a strong use case that people were asking for, where they want an organization with a list of services attached to it. And that was the kind of way around that it did. So the issue that it's causing is, so that relationship is added as a kind of post or pre-compilation step in the schema. So there isn't just a deterministic input this schema and you will get this result. There is an exceptional case being made for the organization schema, as well as a few other ones which kind of involve some, for want of a better term, manual insertion of new fields and relationships, which kind of is masked from people. So that was kind of highlighted. And then that same kind of behavior is resulting in people who are trying to implement a profile having problems implementing the profile the way they want, because they can't remove that relationship because it isn't declared. So if you can't declare it, you can't declare that you don't want it. And therefore it's just being added to their attempt to make a profile. So something needs to happen, but I think we've got flexibility to understand what is it that we want and then work towards there. I care about just being honest and transparent about what we want and the trade-offs that we're making.
Yeah, it's, to me, I mean, again, maybe I'm not got all the pieces, but from my perspective, even if we acknowledge that from a usage perspective, it is often a service first approach, and that's what people are often accessing first, and the organization can be a sort of secondary pathway or a way that things are managed for updates, or there's other reasons why we want to organize services around organizations, and that's important too. The reality is that the direction is clear, that the service belongs to the organization, and we've had problems in the past where we have had services that were cooperatively run by multiple organizations. That is something we've had to deal with, that is kind of gross and that we've had to work around with. But fundamentally, the organization is the umbrella for the service. Even if people are primarily searching service first, the organization is the umbrella for the service. And trying to point it in both directions is just a recipe for disaster. And there's no reason why we cannot query by organization. Like, we can query the service table by organization if people want to be able to retrieve all services for an organization without creating an explicit relationship in the other direction. It just is a mess. Like, from an implementation perspective, from, even things like if you have systems that do cascade deletes, if you're making these circular relationships, you're just creating orphans all over the place and things getting stuck and unable to clean up if you make these relationships that, from my perspective, do not need to be there. Again, we have had cases where a service is cooperatively run, but we've always picked a primary organization to own the service in the system. And then there are other ways to document in the service that there is a connection to a secondary organization. So That's my 2 cents. It does not make sense to create. If I had been involved at the time that it was suggested to do that, I would have absolutely said, do not do this. Now that it's there, it's a question of how much does it mess people up to take this out? And that I don't know, right? I don't think it should be there, but is taking it away going to screw people up? I don't know.
Thanks, Kate. Nick,
Should I just hang on until Matt's back?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll keep quiet until Matt's back. I think you need to say it.
and does anybody else have thoughts or questions out there? I'm generally of the opinion that we should, default to describing things as they are, rather than baking in implementation logic at the standard level. But that is an abstract principle. But I'm seeing some nods about it. We've previously dealt with this in the past where, somebody said it's much more efficient for an application to assume that every service belongs to a specific individual location. But that's just like not actually how the world works. And so, that has historically been like the one time we actually had conflict in our process was the developer was like, this is less efficient. And everybody else agreed that, the spec should describe the world as it actually is and let people cope with implementation challenges at their level, right, in their context. So, oh, hello.
That's a very young wife.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, my recollection is that HSDS as a whole allows for kind of almost many-to-many relationships, whereas the UK profile does not. And we're very clear that one organization, a service is linked only to one organization, and that should make things clearer.
So I was waiting for Matt to come back, but I'll share my thoughts, which I think is we've actually got a standard that is 2 standards trying to pretend to be 1 standard here, and maybe even 3. How an API for an endpoint works is a different question to what is the data model that is underpinning the data that API serves, and I think Catherine explained that pretty well. But I think there may be a point where we say that this is an API spec and it's got a particular role, and there's a separate profile, which is what is the set of data that API needs to go and work on. And that's an incredibly tightly coupled thing, but one of them is firmly in the platform deliverable physical space for specific use cases, and the other one is more generic and reusable and all the rest of it. And I think you will need to profile both ends. But for me, I think that you often get confused between the interoperability requirements and the persistence requirements. And there is a need to understand what needs to be persisted so that the API can do all of that Hatios stuff.
All right. Any other comments? And then Matt, let's see if you're ready to sum up and or ask any final questions to point us in the direction of potential resolution. Anybody else before Matt jumps back in? All right, Matt, go ahead.
Great. What? Have you got thoughts on data governance, Dawn? This is Dawn, by the way.
Hello, Dawn.
Not my wife, but a toddler. So I think for me, I agree that this recursive relationship isn't useful. As ever the pragmatist, I am anxious that it is there now, and we have a governance model based on semantic versioning, which means that it is technically, if we want to remove this, a major upgrade. Which kind of, and I know that from the UK perspective, the part of being a government standard or government approved, yeah, it is black. Part of being a government approved standard is that you have some kind of level of stability in your kind of versioning. So from the UK perspective, I think this could be removed at the profile level. I think that's fine, given the right tooling. A practical step is, I think we definitely need to change the way that the profile tooling works, either by reworking what we've got or kind of building something very lightweight, very dedicated, and a bit more easy to kind of keep in one's head. And what else? What are my other thoughts? Yeah, and I think I agree with Nick's point in that, where I think maybe we're trying to do a lot here. There was a decision at HSDS 3.0 to kind of bring the API specification versioning into the kind of same governance process as a data model and kind of version them in lockstep. And I think there's no right or wrong way to do that. Like, we could govern them separately and say, well, this is the API specification, it's linked to this version of the API specification, like fits with this version of HSDS. That's fine. It's also fine to do this. It's just about the trade-offs that we're making. And I think there is a risk of conflating kind of what the models in HSDS are to kind of physical implementation details. JSON schema kind of is a bit of a strange beast because it's kind of half logical model, half kind of has opinions about physical transmission details. Yeah, it is, Dawn. I'm going to mute myself now because I've been on a soapbox for about 2 minutes, and also Dawn is contributing in non-constructively. But final questions are, I suppose, how important is it that we address this recursive relationship? What do we think that implies about what governance steps we need to take, and are we ready to take those steps if it is an important thing that we need to kind of cut away, or are there ways that we just accept that as technical debt and work around it within the scope of the next kind of few years?
It's an observation. You may well be in a situation where the UK version doesn't get a breaking change, but the international version does. So that then brings the question, what version number should the UK use at that point? Did it stay on a 3 version or go to a 4? But that's a bit of a conundrum for the future, I think. And for the UK.
Okay. Are we ready to, I don't think we're ready to resolve this conversation, but maybe we can summarize it. And sort of like, maybe in the next meeting, we can review a proposed course of action. I'm also a little wary of going farther towards resolution without Skylar here, because I think there are some questions about federation that he's been thinking through. So I don't want to miss any perspective on that. Matt.
So after that kind of existential kind of thing, there are some practical next steps that we can take. We can rework the way that the profiles tooling works in order to kind of get rid of the problem that people are having, that they can't get rid of these recursive relationships if they don't want them. That would also allow us to kind of allow for that resolution of that kind of ID level issue as well with profiles. So that's kind of a really pragmatic within the scope of, it's not even part of the versioning of the standard at that point. It's kind of discussing our tooling. So that's very achievable. I've kind of spent a little bit more time with the schema tools now, and at that level, it's just a software engineering question of whether we untangle some of it or kind of start again. Your glasses. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. Sorry.
Okay, great. I think we might leave it there. It's what I'm hearing, and I didn't follow this as closely as I would have liked to, but to properly change this would entail a major change. We don't actually think we're like ready or that it's urgent for that, especially because there are changes we can make in the documentation and the tooling, which will practically address the actual challenges. And so we can put a change on the backlog, for the schema itself to be dealt with when we're ready to go to 4.0, and in the meantime provide accommodations in our collateral materials to help people work with this. Nick, any closing thoughts?
Just a question: if we do jump up to version 4 at some stage, is it then is someone able to reintroduce it at the profile level so that they maintain the compatibility with how they used to be, by adding it back into the service to get the list of organizations, or is that something that the profiling mechanism doesn't cope with? I'm showing my ignorance in profiling.
I'm going to leave that as an open question. Okay. Matt, do you need that again, or should we loop back to that later, Matt?
Yeah, so can I just quickly get that again? Sorry, I just have to do a bit of impromptu childcare.
So, use case where we leap up to version 4, can a current version 3 person who has the array of services as part of what array of organizations have as part of what they do, can they reintroduce that through the profiling mechanism at a later date?
Absolutely. So you can do that in two ways. You can specify a branch of the schema's GitHub in order to keep your profile based off of that branch. But if you wanted to, you could also add in that as through the profiling mechanism. It just under the hood, it just runs a JSON merge patch, which kind of results in a new thing.
Okay.
So version 4 is not a disaster, is what I'm saying. It doesn't remove utility from end people. It just means that the standards then going through governance, which is a bit of an ache. Yes,
you could. It would be a very convoluted thing to do on the ground, but there is a theoretical future where you could, because profiles are governed separately and kind of on their own governance systems, a profile could decide to change its base branch to a 4.0, but actually make a list of changes which basically keeps it identical. Absolutely. And they could keep their own version number because they haven't actually introduced any changes.
Yep.
Okay. Wrapping this issue up, unless I hear any other last minute questions or comments. Okay. So I want to open the floor for the rest of our time today to thinking expansively about potential priorities for our year. I'm thinking specifically around documentation. What kinds of documentation resources might we want to consider producing? Our purpose here is really generating a long list, going at this point for quantity. We will not be able to, with our limited resources, do everything that anybody suggests, but let's see if we can generate a list of what you all think would be useful in terms of documentation that supports implementers, adopters, etc. I will also say, if there's something else on your mind where you're like reflecting over the last year of what we've done together and you want to set up a priority or something we want to discuss for this coming year, even if it's not immediately documentation related, I'd welcome your suggestions on the floor. But just to get our gears turning, I'll just recap what we discussed last time. We identified that there's a need for how-to documentation for generating a profile. That seems to me to be a no-brainer, something we should almost certainly take responsibility for making sure that we produce. We also talked about a tutorial for working data into and out of a flat spreadsheet format, into and out of standards compliant data. That also seems to me to clearly reflect broad users' needs that I've encountered in a range of contexts. I don't know how difficult that kind of tutorial documentation will be, but it's certainly something we should consider. A couple of others, potentially a tutorial for learning about the difference between a concept model and a logical model and their relationship to each other. And a tutorial for designing data partnerships, which we already have some materials to facilitate that. That is less technical, but I think a great example of the kind of thinking that we're looking for from you all. So it doesn't just need to be about the schema documentation, but resources that will help make the standard more valuable because it helps people achieve what they want with standardized data. So I'll pause here and see. Let's just see if we can go around and have people, chime in with what's been on your mind. If you have more than one, if you have more than a couple things on your mind, please just take a moment to write a list and give us a couple, and then share the remainder of the list over text. But anybody want to kick us off with something that's coming right to mind when I give you this prompt? Matt.
Yep. So thinking about some form of documentation which explains just because we have this structure in the JSON doesn't mean that your database needs to look like this. It just needs to end up looking like this. That you can storage is an implementation is totally abstracted. Here's some ways you might go about it, but don't worry about designing your tables in a particular way as long as you can get to this result. That's the important thing. I'm not sure whether that's a tutorial or whether that's a how-to or whether that's kind of one of the other things in that kind of quadrant that we discussed earlier.
Okay, so a tutorial or maybe how-to for referencing HSDS in database design.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay.
And sort of following on from what Matt said, I think in version 3, we made the leap of moving from a data structure which represents a relational database to an API-based standard. And certainly what we've done in the UK is produce some documentation which helps less advanced users understand the advantages of using an API, and something which introduces Open Referral more as an API-based standard, and the concepts behind that might be useful, I feel.
Okay. Any other technical or otherwise topics, questions that you all think we might consider developing material to help people answer?
I've added a couple. So the first one is just being able to actually demonstrate what the standard looks like in different representations. They've been formative, not normative, but to have it in different serializations. And the second one is just put in place that logical model that sits on top of the JSON schema and demonstrate the traceability between the JSON schema and the logical model.
Okay.
I think actually this committee would benefit from that too. It's in the chat if you want to copy and paste.
Yeah, I'm getting it. Yeah. Anybody else comments? Jen, I saw you sent a note that indicated that you were enthusiastic about the prospect of a tutorial for designing data partnerships. And I am in the process of gathering together a whole bunch of materials that either can help you with the process of designing data partnerships, or are reference points for what might be the outputs of a data partnership design process. But Jen, I really welcome your further feedback to help delineate like what specific kinds of instructional content might be helpful.
Like right now, or when you create a draft?
Yeah, at any point. Yeah, we're in brainstorming mode right now. Yeah.
I mean, I guess I would maybe start with what you would consider baseline, and I can add thoughts after that. But there's just, obviously, you all know this better than I do, there's just so many derivations of what is in the field that it's hard to even move people forward in solutions if they don't know what is an option. So it's a super broad topic, but yeah.
Well, and Jen, for your point of reference, what I have is examples of working backward, examples of a charter, examples of a data partnership agreement. And then, the closest thing that I have to a tutorial, I'd be very reluctant to be like, here is how you design your data partnership agreement. But what we do have is a whole list of questions that are like, how might we, how should we, how how will we, that so it's not like here's the steps you take, but here are questions that you and your prospective partners ought to be able to answer in order to get to the point where you can know what goes into your data partnership agreement, for example.
Makes good sense.
Other comments? Matt, I see your hand up.
Yeah, you can finish if you want to continue that thread.
Go
I just
ahead.
had some other suggestions. Okay, cool. I would like some sort of material around highlighting data use of HSDS, because that's kind of what the motivation is, right? So understanding if you have this information, you can do this type of analysis or solve these, not solve, but like think about these types of problems. And here's the fields you need to do it. So the schema defines your minimum requirements, but if you really want to get the most out of your HSDS, here's the type of stuff that you want to be outputting and exchanging and exciting stuff like that.
So that's interesting, because we do have a pretty scanty list of example use cases, right? What you can use HSDS to do, but you're suggesting that within that list, there are actually some important distinctions to pull out in terms of, like, in order to do this, you would need the following kinds of information, and we can get more, okay. So specific, so guidance material for specific use cases.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. All right.
Another one in my head. When I've imported the JSON schema into the modeling tool, I've added all of the implicit data types that JSON schema defines within the schema standard rather than within the HSDS standard. But I think you actually need to look at JSON schema as a specification alongside HSDS to understand HSDS, whereas bringing the two together and understanding what a date looks like, understanding what an email address looks like, and JSON schema does it in a little weird way because it's using two fields to do what normally you would do in a single field of a data type,
right?
Because it's got the string and then the format rather than that being a data type. So it's a string data type, but with the format layered on top of it.
Right.
And I think just bringing that into one space would make understanding what we're asking people to do a lot easier.
Okay. And I'll also clarify, some of these items, when prioritized, might be things that I task my, implementation teams and or Open Data Services Co-op with producing. Some of these might be things that any of you all or anybody in the community might be able to be like,
Yeah.
I'm going to do this and I'm going to produce it. And some of these things, like tutorials for how to use JSON schema or how to understand it, might be things for which there are probably open source tutorial resources already out there that we could leverage and redeploy for this purpose. So just flagging, that, which is not super important now. It'll be more important once we have to prioritize among these. Any other comments? This can be a rolling conversation. But any things that you all want to, maybe you don't have a fully formed thought yet, but you want to put a phrase or a statement on the agenda for us to explore leading up to the next meeting and during the next meeting.
It feels like something that could go onto GitHub backlog or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
GitHub projects side of things, the basic projects that should be sufficient to handle this.
Yeah. I think we have a GitHub projects board. It's possibly a little dusty at the minute, and I think it's on my backlog for dusting it off and kind of bringing it up to speed.
Okay, so we will convert these into issues that we can continue to refine and aggregate those issues on, on a project board. That's something I can work on with Sasha and Matt.
Yeah, and feature requests effectively.
All right. Any other final thoughts? Okay, so next time, Matt, do you have any suggestions for people with regards to the issues that we didn't get to because Skylar wasn't here, the normalized email objects and contact methods, like any guidance that you want to give so that when we meet next time, maybe we're just ready to ritually affirm where you've landed if nobody has any issues with where you're landing. What guidance do you have for the committee between now and the next meeting?
Between now and the next meeting, the committee should go away and read Skylar's forum threads, and he's also done a kind of a soft proposal. Those still need working into formal proposals for the committee where we make specific suggestions for changes to the schema and any subsequent API changes. I don't think there are any. So only action for the committee, I would say, is go and read those threads, try to understand the problems that Skylar's kind of grappling with, and then see where we are in terms of touching upon ways around it, and then weigh in that space, because I think we're going to be starting to work up those formal proposals within the next kind of month. Just as a thing though, formal proposals can be iterated on. You can just say no, we can go away and rework them and reintroduce them to the committee in a following meeting. That's fine and is an understood part of that process. Okay.
I have one, I'll try and be brief on the context that when you're thinking about this, I want you to consider that consumers of the contact data approach it from a pathways perspective and not a priority perspective. Meaning the contact is determined by the need and not the organization's priority. And so I object to a priority-based contact structuring because I believe a pathways-based structuring of contact is more sensible. People contact a specific person or contact method based on their need and not based on an organization's priority for contact method. So that is my 2 cents. Please think about that before we go further with it.
I want to better understand that, Kate, because those seem like the same issue to me. Just from it seems both are subjective.
Yes, within an organization. So there's two parts of pathways, right? There is the pathway of I need a particular kind of contact at an organization. Like I need to talk to an executive, I need to talk to a service entry person, I need to talk to an intake coordinator. Like there's specific pathways that someone has to take to address their need. That is not just generic. That is the case for almost any kind of service entry at a larger organization. Small organizations may only have one contact entry point, but large organizations and programs have particular processes and entry points that are determined by what the person needs. And so priority does not make sense. There is also an accessibility pathway that has to be considered, that people choose their method of contact based on what they are comfortable with, based on what they have access to. And I don't care what the organization's priority is in that case, because people need to or do best accessing contacts based on the easiest and best way for them to access it. And most organizations around here anyway operate these days on a no wrong door policy, where they don't want to pressure people to contact them in a specific way because there's a recognition that that is counter to accessibility.
Okay, so if I'm understanding, then the squaring the difference here is what you're saying is the spec ought to be able to indicate what kind of contact is for what different purpose, and then implementers can then decide, for this context, I'm going to, elevate the priority of this particular pathway because it's for these kinds of users in this kind of context. And so we can have it both ways, as long as we're not just saying that priority is a matter of numeric ranking.
Right. Well, and there's a negative context to doing a priority ranking in terms of accessibility, that it's important to have information about what the contact points are for, so people can make an appropriate choice. So that's a matter of context for the contact and not ranking. Right. And that ranking can have a negative effect on accessibility. And so that should be considered when we consider whether ranking is helpful.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that, Kate. That was super interesting. Let's make sure, I've taken that in the notes. Let's make sure to get that into the issue discussion. If you want, I can make a note that if we don't hear from you in that thread, I will relay it from the notes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers all. Bye bye.